Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'm of course your host, TJ. I wanted to review just quickly a lovely book that I just finished a few days ago called The Rainbow Age of Television by Shana Macy Warner. And they have done a fantastic job with this book, kind of giving us a highlight reel of gay and queer representation of all kinds across the alphabet for the last roughly 50 or so odd years. They move from the 50s and 60s right up into the present and kind of give us a bird's eye view of what representation, as far as queerness goes, has looked like over the decades. And obviously, it's been, a mixed bag. There has been some significant periods of growth and development, but there's also been some backsliding, as we're currently seeing, as the number of queer folks in pop culture continues to decline, faced with the pressures of the horrible world that we live in. But I do appreciate that, it's very easy to write reductively about representation. And, obviously there are many ways to think about what queerness is doing in pop culture without just relying on, how is this positive? Is it negative? How is it affecting the community? And that can be, somewhat reductive, and it can kind of, stymie us in our efforts to really sort of get to the meat of what queer representation or what queer presence in film and TV can do. But I think that, books like this one are useful for helping us to understand just how much, the representation of all kinds of queer folk, first, beginning roughly with the L's and the G's, and then moving on to the B's and the T's and the Q's and the I's and everything else, has changed over the decades. And that we go from being, TV sort of articulating this very regressive vision of what queerness is and the threat that it poses to mainstream society, to being accepted. There are some key benchmarks. They talk about All in the Family, which had a very notable queer character for a time. They talk about, some of the 80s shows, including The Golden Girls, that one of my personal favorites that has queer representation. Then, of course, there's the Will and Graces and the queerest folks in the L words of the 90s into the 2000s, and then the present period, where we have Pose, and we have all these other more groundbreaking series that emerge in the 2010s and the 2020s. They kind of close with, kind of where are we going now, or what's the fate of queer TV in this era that we live in? I mean, and, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I don't think it's necessarily, I think we may be out of the rainbow age, and I think that's really quite a shame, because as they point out, queer people have appeared in TV in all sorts of ways, and sometimes in unexpected ways, in unexpected genres. And that's, I think that a book is successful when it teaches me things. I mean, if you don't know, I have a PhD in English, but also specifically focused on film and TV. So I know a lot about queer representation. I know a lot about its history, but I did find, some new things in here. And I think that Warner does a good job of highlighting, some of the ephemerality of queer media and just TV in general, which up until fairly recently was understood to be fundamentally an ephemeral kind of disposable medium, as was film in some ways. The home video kind of changed the whole game in the 80s and 90s, and we're still living with that. So it is sometimes hard to track down some of the earliest representations of queer folk, but they've done a really good job. Now, as much as I appreciate their analysis, and I think they are very spot on, I also appreciate that they have interviews with a lot of queer actors and queer creators in TV. The interview with Stephanie Beatriz of Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Encanto and all those roles is, I think, one of the best parts of it. But they also interview one of the Wachowskis is interviewed, and so there's a pretty wide-ranging discussion from various actors, directors, and writers who have played such a key role in bringing queerness to our television screens. So I really appreciate this book. I think it is a fantastic addition to anyone's shelf. It's written in such a way that I think it's quite accessible to my mainstream audience, which is really good. I think that's not always an easy thing to do when you're talking about film and media studies. So it's really exciting to see this kind of popular criticism out there, and I think there's a huge space for that kind of work, and it's very valuable. So I would definitely highly recommend The Rainbow Age of Television. And anything else that Warner has written. I think that they're just a really good researcher, a very good erudite writer, and they ask some very piercing and poignant questions of their interview subjects. And so it all sort of combines into a very robust examination of how queerness has functioned within the world of television for roughly 50, 70, however many years now that we're dealing with. So definitely would get this one. This gets the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture seal of approval. I think it's a fantastic sort of primer for queerness in TV. So Rainbow Age of Television is a great read. Go ahead and read it. It gets my seal of approval here at Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. So as always, I'm your host TJ. Take care, y'all.